Sullivan, and joining me in studio, I welcome our energy coordinator, Richard Elrick. Richard, good morning.
Good morning, Sarah.
How are you today?
I'm doing great. I don't like the humidity too much out there. It's awful uncomfortable.
It's been keeping me from biking as much as I'd like to. So
yes, indeed. And I know everyone, when I mention this fact that it seems awfully hot, they'd say, bite your tongue. It could be like last winter. So
exactly.
I try to remember what last winter was like and enjoy the heat while we have it. It's flying by too fast.
I've tried to block out that winter, but yes, it is absolutely flying by too fast. So all sorts of things to talk about today. We've been talking the last couple of times you've been here about the request for proposals for an engineer to look at the transfer station, and I understand a contract has been awarded.
Indeed. Yep. We had several very competent proposals submitted, and we ultimately ended up going with a firm called Environmental Partners. They actually have an office here in Hyannis, and in really all ways, their proposal was outstanding. In addition, they've had a long-standing relationship with the town, so we're familiar with them. We're familiar with the work they do. They actually are also doing some engineering work currently at the transfer station by way of monitoring what's going on there. So we're excited to have them on board. And they also have the lowest priced proposal as well, which is always an extra goodie that goes along with this. But as we've talked before, they're going to be developing a proposal. We hope that they'll be concluded with their work either at the very last part of this calendar year or at the beginning of the next year in January, we expect. And they're going to be focused on trying to develop plans to really make the experience at the transfer station better for the customers who use it. The goal is to increase the safety, so they're going to look at the road layouts as well. And we also want to increase the recycling rate and reduce the actual trash that gets delivered to the facility by our customers. So they're going to put together a couple of different options, sort of a high-priced option, a mid-priced option, and a less expensive option, and really look at the entire operation to see what makes sense, not only for the short term, but for the long term. But we're excited about the effort and looking forward to seeing what comes out of it.
Absolutely. And so when are they going to begin work right away, kind of analyzing and taking a look at the transfer station, saying this is what we have now, this is what we should do in the future? Yeah,
they're going to be making several additional site visits. They're going to be looking at all of the data. Of course, we'll start off with a kickoff meeting, and Bob Lovell and I and several other staff folks will sit around a table with the engineers and just sort of flesh out how it is we want to proceed, further get a better picture on what their ultimate goals are by way of work product. But they're going to look at all of the data. They're going to look at what our current recycling rate is. They're going to sort of visually inspect the premises to see how things are flowing by way of traffic. They're going to do traffic counts so they can get a handle on how many people are actually using it. Anybody who's been there on a Saturday knows how incredibly busy that place can be.
Yes.
And with the cross traffic flows that exist there in certain locations, it's really a challenge. So they're going to look at all of that. They're going to look at the buildings, the location of the buildings, the efficacy of the location for each building to determine whether it deserves to be where it is or where it might go to get a better result for the transfer station users. They're going to look at the weigh station to see whether or not that should be repositioned. And they're going to look also at where we have our trash drop-off location and where we have our recycling drop-off location to see whether or not they can be exchanged to a better end. So there is an awful lot they're going to be looking at, but it's going to start by looking at the status quo, looking at our numbers and data, and then moving on from there.
Awesome. Well, we will look forward to seeing how that works. While we're at the transfer station, of course, back in January, we did sign a new contract with a new kind of person who takes the trash away. I was going to be going to the Zero Waste Solutions facility that is still under construction. That's still been delayed. So tell me a little bit about what's going on there.
Yeah, we're actually a little bit disappointed. We were anticipating that with the signing of the contract, this new facility in Rochester would essentially be completed at the very latest. We were advised early on that it would be completed this summer. But unfortunately, we've been notified that indeed the facility is not going to be ready now until April of 2016. So that's disappointing. We are still very pleased, of course, that the the amount we're paying to dispose of our trash is quite a bit less than it would be if we had gone and stayed with CMAS Covanta. But we're excited about the environmental nature of the new facility. It's going to be solar powered essentially, and producing a very sort of modern, what they call an EcoTac briquette from all of the residue that's left over after the recycled materials are taken out. So we're not real happy about it at this point. Not much we can do about it. The contract calls for them to collect our trash and dispose of it at a certain rate, which obviously they're committed to do, even if it's costing them more to dispose of it in another location. We want to keep your viewers updated about what's happening, and to express our disappointment, but understanding that sometimes these things happen. There have been a couple of issues, and I don't have all the details about why it's taken them so much longer. But the word is now that they expect April will be the completion date for the new facility, and then we'll get what we hoped we were going to get in the first place. Okay,
well, we'll keep our fingers crossed that that stays on track. So we talked at the beginning of our conversation about how hot it's been lately, and it's kind of interesting because July apparently was the hottest month on record.
Yeah, it's this is a sort of a continuing side story that we get back to every so often, talking about the impacts of climate change, and it was just reported by NOAA that this past July was the hottest month ever across the planet.
Wow.
So that's a pretty significant record, I think, to have been reached. Actually, 9 of the 10 hottest months have occurred since 2005. And the first 7 months of this year are also the hottest months on record. So it's not a good trend, obviously. The impacts and the effects of this greater heat across the planet will have different implications, really depending on what part of the world you're living in. And associated with the higher temperature extremes, of course, is sea level rise as well. For this particular heat record, there essentially are two explanations. One, of course, we've talked about is climate change, but also the scientists believe that another element to why this was such a hot month is a very potent El Nino that's taking place in the Pacific. And of course, that's when periodically the ocean currents sort of collect off the western coast of South America, and there is an increase in temperature, partly not only the circulation currents of the oceans, but also the air circulation currents sort of come together in this perfect storm of increased heat. And so the oceans are heating up and thereby accelerating the heating of the atmosphere as well. And so those come periodically, unlike what we can anticipate with climate change, which is a sort of an ongoing, steady increase in temperature. And again, just to remind folks, it doesn't mean that it's always going to be hotter everywhere.
Right.
Indeed, there are some locations of the planet that, as a result of climate change, might see colder temperatures. And we did mention this before. For example, all of the fresh water that's entering the northern Atlantic oceans from melting glaciers in Greenland, for example, could have the impact of cooling down the Gulf Stream as it goes to Europe. So Europe might, in effect, experience some colder temperatures moving forward, where the rest of the ambient temperature around the planet would be higher. So there's an awful lot about climate change that we really don't know,
right,
and can't entirely predict, but the scientists are pretty clear that what we can be sure of is that we are going to see continuing increases and changes that are caused by the increasing amounts of carbon emissions that we have in our atmosphere.
Indeed. Hence the electric vehicles that we have here in town, and we've seen the popularity of those rise, and that kind of segues into our next segment, which is talking a little bit about the charger here at Town Hall. Had kind of an issue with the chargers here at Town Hall.
Yeah, particularly, as you say, the Town Hall charger. We have recently had to replace it, and didn't know at first what was the problem. We were looking at the electric vehicles themselves. The two Nissan Leafs that we're leasing were having some problems, and we thought maybe it's the leafs themselves, so we replaced the onboard chargers. Then there were still some issues, and then finally, in speaking with Aero Environment, which is the vendor for the chargers at Town Hall, thankfully the chargers are still under warranty, so they sent us a new charger. We recently had that installed, and so everything appears to be working fine now. New charger, new onboard charger, the brains of the chargers in the vehicle, so everything is working fine. But I don't know whether we've got pictures that are available, but we did find a couple of serious issues with the charger that we replaced. That first picture up there shows a pretty serious cut in the charging cable. We haven't confirmed exactly what caused it, but we think it had to do with the fact that the cables were left on the ground, and perhaps they were abraded in some way by a tire running over it. We're not really sure, but certainly a cut in the cable like that could have been responsible for the problems we were having with the charger. And so that was a concern, and so certainly now we're asking anybody who uses these electric chargers to make sure they recoil the cables. A little extra work. Sometimes it's just easier to leave them on the ground, but if we're going to have these chargers last as long as they should be lasting and work as they should, we got to make sure that we coil the chargers up when we're done using them.
Absolutely.
And we've got several town vehicles, and I know this goes out to the public, so now the public is also aware that if they want to use our charger, they got to make sure to coil up the cable. The other thing is, and I think you had one more picture up there, we also found that there was a nest of hornets, by God, in our charger. And there's a picture that shows their little hives, and we weren't sure, and off here you and I were debating, were they hornets, were they bees, were they wasps? But we think that they were hornets from the observation I made of those buggers getting in and out of that charger. It did appear as though they were hornets.
And it just goes to show you, we're talking about Mother Nature, and she's pretty strong, and those bugs, they'll just get in there and make their nest anywhere. They don't care
well,
if it's high voltage or not, so.
I've been advised by our vendor that the newer models we have are tighter, so we should not have bees deciding to call our chargers home anymore.
Okay, we'll keep our fingers crossed on that for sure. And again, a good reminder to folks to have that etiquette and coil up the cables. And maybe if you're walking through Town Hall and you see the cable kind of snaked out, stop by and pick it up.
I like that. Electric vehicle charging etiquette.
That's right.
Very good.
Everything has etiquette. Well, Richard, I thank you so much as always for joining us here on Barnstable this morning. A pleasure to have you on the show, and we will chat with you again in a couple of weeks.
Look forward to it.
Thank you so much. Richard Elrick is our energy coordinator here in the town of Barnstable. I'm Sarah Coleman.